don't have a program here, because we found when we had one, hardly anyone came. People are too busy with the holidays and stuff, so we felt like, oh, let's just stop that. So the only thing, what big holiday? Your favorite one? Maybe not, I don't know.
I love New Year's.
Anyway, so we have our community shopping at Just Fair Market, which if you come, that we get a little proceeds, as Kathleen
Oh,
will
this is just
explain.
a really win-win situation. Okay, you can kill two birds, no, you
No,
can.
don't kill.
No, not kill, you can get two birds with one stone. In fact, I think you can get three birds. Never mind. Okay, this is the benefit for you, because there's some really great things out there. And if you don't need any of those other little doo-doos that are all around, the jewelry and stuff, the stocking stuffers, you can get coffee and chocolate. Okay, there's plenty of that. Okay, it's a win for Fond du Lac Area Bird and Nature Alliance, that's us now. It's a win for us because we get a certain percentage of the profits for that day. And you have to shop between 10 a.m. and 5 p.m. Or you can go online and you can shop online and then pick it up the next day. All you have to do is make sure that it says that it's for the, you can say Audubon yet there. Okay, they'll recognize it, okay.
And what's our new name?
The Fond du Lac Area Bird and Nature Alliance is the new name. Okay, and so then this is also a win for Just Fair Market.
Yeah.
And boy, with the tariffs, they really need to have people out there buying stuff. So please come and support all three of those.
Right.
Is that okay?
And you need stocking stuffers anyway, or something like
Yes.
that.
Oh, there's all kinds of cool stuff.
There's
Yeah,
lots
there
of
is.
things.
Really is.
Kathleen and
So
I have a
bring
little
your-
competition.
Yes, we do.
usually
Bring your credit card or your money
Well, we have been the biggest until
until the retired
until
teachers.
last year, and then the retired teachers
They
beat us.
moved in and beat us.
And they partly beat us because I told Mary Sutherland our strategy.
Oh, that was, oh.
And we have retired teachers.
We do, but I always do it for our outfit. So then, the other thing you need to be aware of, and you'll get this when you get your newsletter, and that is the Small Mountain Owls presentation in January is gonna be on Zoom. We're trying this, he's out in Colorado. And so what you will get is you will get the link in the email the day before or something like that. And if you don't get it, let us know. But,
then
and
they'll
if you
show
are
it on
not.
this screen, so we can come here and watch.
No, you're at home.
Oh.
That way nobody has to travel if there's snow or whatever, So we thought, well, we'll try it that way just to give it a try. We've never done that. So it will be a Zoom meeting only. So all you have to do is go on the link. You've all done Zoom before, I would assume. It's pretty common. If not, see us. And if you don't get our emails, which are mostly just reminders of the meeting, we'll send the email or the Zoom link on that email. So if you don't get that, send or sign up your email tonight so we make sure we have it, so you get the link.
Yeah, make sure we have your correct email.
Yeah, right. Okay, and then I think that's all I need to say. So, take it away, our skater.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry, one last thing, sorry. So one other thing you could do for a Christmas gift, if you want to give one of these prints that were donated to Audubon, well, our new name. But anyway, Kathleen has them in possession in her house. And if you want to discuss, buying one of them, see her afterwards. And this shows a picture of what they are. So if maybe you should explain this.
They're not for sale. You can have one for a tax-deductible donation.
Yeah.
And the funds go to the camp scholarships for the kids. And
For the
the field
EE.
trip that we do for Boys Girls Club.
Yeah.
And the prizes that we give to land and water conservation, so it goes to all of those things for kids.
Yeah.
So, and because we're a tax exempt organization, you can just write out the check and it will be tax deductible for you, and you can pick out your print. for whatever.
Right, and
want
you
to
can
give.
donate whatever you feel.
They're
you-
very nice.
Yeah. So anyway, see Kathleen afterwards if you might be interested in that.
And they're signed and numbered.
Yeah, very good. Okay, take it away, sorry.
Thank you. As many of you already know, but I'm a retired science teacher. I was a science teacher for, I don't know, 40 years.
1 second.
Yeah.
One more thing, sorry. I should have made a list.
Yeah, so.
Sorry.
So we have, the Audubon does spring invasives and then fall invasives. So the whole season is over, and if you've noticed on the newsletter, we do Hobbs Woods, we were doing Elliott Park in the springtime, we do Come Lorraine. The Audubon, this wonderful group, has decided to do, invasive species pulling at my family's property, that we've got a nonprofit that owns some conservation property. That's the property in the newsletter called Kay's Ledge. So I just wanna say that the impact that the Audubon has had on our property has been phenomenal. This past spring, without me participating, the Audubon put in I think it was like 40 hours, yeah, without my time, tackling, and tackling this horrible spot about an acre that was just totally gone with invasives. So you guys gave me, and I just couldn't look at this area, I'm like, I can't deal with it. So anyway, we tackled all the invasives in that area and spread out and covered some other areas. So I'm so happy and so fortunate that you're helping me take care of this piece of property. And then the buckthorn, we put in, without my time, about 30 hours pulling buckthorn, and we adopted the area by our pond, to clear that area out. So the same thing, it was just, for just a few people to do it is really hard work. And you guys really made an effort, and Kay's like really appreciates it. And as a thank you, we're gonna try to have more activities. I think we might have a picnic or something for everybody at the Audubon to just come and enjoy themselves and go hiking and whatever. So we'll keep doing those kind of things. I wanna do something special for you guys next year. So thank you.
Okay, now I think
It's such a beautiful area. If you haven't been there, volunteer just so you can go see it.
Yeah, well, we have things though that.
Right,
we
right,
can come to.
right.
Yeah.
And Liz is a wonderful host.
So, I was at the Wisconsin Society of Science Teachers field trip, a farm walk, here in Fond du Lac last spring. Although I'm retired, I still participate in some of the science teacher events at the conference that they have every year. And one of them was a farm walk, and they invited a colleague of yours named Ashley from Eau Claire area, I
Yep.
want to say,
Yep.
to talk about farmland conservation grazing. Because the farm we were at had horses and sheep. She grazed sheep. And actually, it was Julie Fitzpatrick's farm. We had a field trip scheduled there, and the weather was really bad, and we canceled it. So we'll try to schedule the field trip there. It's a really fun farm to visit. Because she has sheep, and she has horses, and she has dogs, herding dogs. So they practice with the sheep. They go
Yeah,
hand in
we're
hand.
gonna try to do that.
Yeah, we'll go
again.
back again. Anyway, she's been getting help and advice through the Conservation Grazing Program, the Audubon program. And I had no idea that Audubon had this kind of presence in our state. I heard Ashley's presentation, and I thought, we just don't know much about this. We've never had someone who's involved with one of our national Audubon programs actually come talk to us. So I asked him to come, and he said, well, I'm way over in Eau Claire. But my counterpart is right nearby in Green Bay, and this is Tom here. And so I contacted Tom and did a bunch of emails and calls, and here he is. So he came down from Green Bay tonight, and he's going to talk with us. You can give more about your background
Sure.
yourself.
Yeah.
But it's conservation, grazing, ranching, farming, and I found it to be very interesting, so I hope you like it. And Tom, thank you.
Well, yeah, thank you for the nice introduction. Thank you, everybody, so much for coming out tonight. I'll try to get us out of here in case the northern lights are out again.
Did you see them last night?
No, it was totally cloudy in Green Bay,
I
unfortunately.
looked, I didn't see them.
Yeah.
Anybody see them?
Yeah.
No, leave it there,
but
because
yeah.
we've got that light coming in that we can't block. Okay. Yeah, we can't block that.
Whatever people, if people want the more light too, that's okay. Whatever you guys want. Cool. Well, I'm Tom Presby. I live in Green Bay, as you heard. I'm the Wisconsin Conservation Manager for Audubon Great Lakes. So what that means is I'm basically the person in charge of Audubon Great Lakes' projects in Wisconsin. I'll talk about what some of those are. And what Audubon Great Lakes is, first of all, is you can think of it as basically like a branch of National Audubon. So we work with National Audubon a lot, but we're not separate from them, but we have our own staff and our own chapters. We represent several of the states in the Great Lakes. We actually, New York should be on here too, because we have some staff in New York. And then the Upper Mississippi River office has these states, and we work with them all the time too. But technically my office is in Chicago. I've never been there after 4 years of being in my position, so I'm lucky I get to work from home in Green Bay or out in the field. And yeah, we've got I believe it's 13 chapters in Wisconsin. You guys are one of them. And over 150,000 active members, 50 plus chapters in the whole Great Lakes. And that's really important because when we apply for grants and stuff for habitat restoration projects and things like that, we can say, hey, this is what we're bringing to the table. We have all these members, etc. We have a policy team who is at the White House, at the state capitol, has a lot of relationships with the governor's aides and the governor himself, senators, House of Representatives, both Democrats and Republicans. We really pride ourselves in working across the aisles, trying to find paths to common sense conservation in a lot of different areas. And I'll be talking about a major one tonight, which is the Working Lands Department. Before I get into that, a couple of the other projects that I work on, if you're curious, we do a lot of wetland restoration stuff, especially Great Lakes coastal wetlands. So if you're familiar with where I'm from in Green Bay, you'll know that basically the whole west shore of the bay is wetlands. That's excellent and critical habitat for birds like bitterns, rails, pine-billed grebes, yellow-headed blackbirds. And if you've ever driven 41 or 43, you see all the horrible Phragmites and invasive cattail infestation. It's even just in the ditches and this high. And so invasive species management can never really get away from that. But that's always a really big part of our work to restore habitat for those species. We've got another big project up in the Duluth Superior area on a wetland that connects to Lake Superior at Louise Bay, if you're familiar with that area. I lead our piping plover monitoring in Green Bay, which is a really fun project. We've had piping plovers breeding in Lower Green Bay for the last 9 years, so I coordinate a team of about 30 volunteer monitors, and we monitor them daily from when they get back in early April to when they leave in late July or early August. And then another thing, you may have heard the term Important Bird Area or IBA before. The Northern Kettle Moraine, I think, is the closest one to here. Horicon is obviously one. You go over towards Sheboygan, the lake shore there is another one. And those IBAs are, I don't want to say run by Audubon, but Audubon kind of organizes that program, and we put effort into figuring out which IBAs need which kind of conservation work in the last few years. But like I said, tonight we are going to talk about our Working Lands program, which is growing and growing. And like I've said, we have a big communications team and also a big policy team. So as I talk, we have people in the White House negotiating things into the Farm Bill, and other things that directly affect things like the CRP, Conservation Reserve Program, that puts bird habitat onto the land in these bills and budgets that the federal government negotiates. I always start with a couple of sad slides just to put things in perspective, but you guys have probably seen this statistic before. Unfortunately, in the last 50 years or so, we've lost a ton of birds from the landscape. It's not just folklore that there used to be more birds around. We've lost about 3 billion birds, and a lot of those birds are grassland birds. Main reason I'm talking about them tonight. Not great news for a lot of groups of birds, but grassland birds lead the way in the big groups of birds for declines, where we've lost more than half of our grassland birds in the last 50 years, which obviously that's a staggering and unsustainable trend when you're losing half of your population in just 50 years. And why is that? A lot of it is habitat conversion. It's not news to you that farms are getting bigger and bigger and bigger with more and more chemicals. Development is going out into the countryside from suburbs, and all sorts of other habitat loss. And then these birds migrate too, so they need areas to stop over, they need wintering habitat. So a lot of things against them, but I'm going to talk today about how, due to some programs, including the one I'm going to talk about, not all hope is lost at all for them. Because we're starting to see some really cool things in this work. So yeah, why grassland birds? Why would it matter if they just continued to decline and basically get phased out? Well, they're really good indicators of the quality of the ecosystem. I'm going to go through species by species, the birds that we use as focal species in this program. And basically, if those species are in a field or a prairie or a pasture, it's a sign that it's a really good area because they need a lot of insects for food, they need seeds off of plants, they need good structure, and if you have structure of vegetation, that is, and if you have those things, it's likely going to mean the soil's high quality. It's likely going to mean that there's clean water in the area because grasslands and the roots of grassland systems make excellent filters and collect runoff water. Especially around farms, this is a big thing. Pest consumption, whether it's insects, whether it's weed seeds, or also rodents. I'm going to talk about a couple of hawk and owl species later too. So the purpose of what I'm going to talk about tonight, which is called Audubon Conservation Ranching, is to stabilize these declining grassland bird populations in partnership with land stewards. So obviously public land like Jersey Flats and the Kettle Moraine, some of the grasslands near Horicon like the Bud Cook Trails, name your favorite grassland. Those are really, really good for birds. They're state-owned or federally owned, so they're in pretty good hands, but there's not a lot of that area, and a lot of a lot of that is already in public ownership, so it's not like we're gonna be buying a lot more land and putting it into grassland. It's just not possible these days. So what Audubon's goal is since there's so much opportunity in private lands, to work with landowners, especially beef grazers, like I'll be talking about tonight, and work with them to both give them benefits and figure out how to make those pastures as good as possible for these grassland birds. And a lot of times it's just minor things that they can tweak with how they're grazing those cattle or other things on their land that can really, really increase the presence of these birds. So you'll see this seal a lot and wearing it. And basically this seal says that any product on Audubon Conservation certified land meets some standards, some protocols that Audubon and our partners like Fish and Wildlife Service, the Nature Conservancy, NRCS, all sorts of other partners have worked together on to put into these protocols. And I'll kind of drill down a little bit deeper without getting too much into the weeds about what those mean. But then, and this has already happened out west where this program is older, but the hope and the goal is that when people see this seal, either at a farmer's market or a grocery store or even on a menu at a restaurant, they'll say, oh, that's cool, that meat is coming from a place that cares about birds, and I'm willing to pay a few more dollars for that. I know I'm eating not just high quality meat, but meat that comes from an area where it's probably or the animals are treated well, there's clean water, and all those sorts of things. So I kind of already mentioned some of this, but some of the benefits that come with this conservation ranching, again, biodiversity is going to be higher, not just the birds, pollinators, you hear a lot about that nowadays, all the insects, bumblebees, butterflies, etc. And carbon sequestration, we hear about trees storing carbon and being critical for fighting climate change, but grasslands and their really, really deep root systems actually store more carbon than forests do. It's a little hard to believe that, but that's what the research shows. Grasslands are excellent storers of carbon. And climate resilience too. Grasslands are, again, fertile soils, deep roots. They're gonna hold more water. They can withstand droughts. Obviously, we've been having more frequent and more severe droughts lately. And if there's a grassland somewhere, it's gonna prevent runoff. If it's a developed area, obviously it's gonna absorb more heat than a grassland would. All those things make grasslands climate resilient areas. So with this program, the Audubon Conservation Ranching, we have three main pillars that the program is based off of. And what I'm going to talk about most tonight is habitat management. And I think on the next slide I'll talk in more detail, but every single place we work with the landowner to make a habitat management plan that's unique to that place. I mentioned this a little bit ago, but animal health and welfare, that's extremely important to this program, kind of like the organic certification, but we have certain rules that outrule things like growth hormones, feedlots for most of the life cycle, or I think all of the life cycle, and then environmental sustainability, restricting pesticides, And then, yeah, restricting fertilizers. Maybe there's some places where it makes sense to use those things, but we really, really want to keep that decreased because, again, we want the diversity of insects and pollinators and a lot of things that usually decreases. So this is not just about bird habitat. This animal welfare and environmental sustainability is very important in this program. Let's see here. There we go. So yeah, I mentioned habitat management plans, and this is one of Ashley's main roles. My colleague who is our grassland ecologist in Wisconsin. And then we have his colleague Kristen is the grassland ecologist in the Driftless area. She's in La Crosse. And what they do is they work with a landowner on a habitat management plan. And in these plans, there are developed protocols that the person strives to meet in the next. There's a 1 year, a 3 year, and a 5 year part of this plan to either keep really good practices the same or improve some practices that can be improved. And then there's always optional things too, where it's a recommendation but not required. And this is totally free to the landowner. And there is teeth behind it. We have a third party called Food Alliance that audits every couple of years. So they come to the property, they look at the habitat management plan, and they make sure that what we've agreed to with the landowner is actually being followed, which makes this certification more legit than if there wasn't any kind of third party involved, making sure that these things are actually happening out on the land with the habitat. And so some examples of things in habitat management plans, a lot of it's gonna be talking about how the cattle are rotated through the pasture. I think I have a graphic of that on my next slide. A lot of times it's things like tree rows or brush rows in between different fields. That's actually a really easy way to, maybe not easy, but a simple way to increase grassland bird habitat, because basically the bigger and more connected area of open grass, the better. So if you can remove a tree row or a brush row along a fence, you just made the habitat better for quite a bit of acreage. And I'll show some pictures of what we've been doing at some sites at the end of my talk. And then, yeah, there's also things like seeding in native species to their pasture mix. Some of our landowners have streams going through, so restoring the riparian areas. And yeah, we've had some really unique situations. Out in the Driftless, there's invasives like multiflora rose that we help them deal with. And we do have some grants that give these landowners money to address these situations. Not a ton of funding, but some. And we also work with them to apply for EQIP and other NRCS funding that is geared toward those habitat improvements. So I mentioned the rotational grazing, and this is basically what we're talking about here. So if you imagine this as a whole pasture, or yeah, someone's land, and then there are different paddocks, there's fences where the white is, and basically the cattle get rotated through these different areas. So the cattle graze it, and then over the next few weeks, the grass is able to grow back up before the cattle come back through later that year or the following year. Like I said before, this usually increases carbon sequestration, collection of rainwater, etc. But yeah, this rotational grazing, and I'm not the expert on that. Ashley, who's our grassland ecologist, you're gonna see a lot of pictures of cows in my slides, and he's actually a grazer himself, and a lot of those pictures are of his cows. So it's great because he uses his expertise to work with all of our landowners. So, like I said, this program started out in the West. The larger the circle, the larger the ranch. We do not have the luxury in Wisconsin of having 500,000 acre ranches. I wish we did, because those are really, really cool spots. But obviously, here in our part of the earth, we're working with ranches that are closer to 80 acres, 100 acres. We have one, I think, in Wisconsin that's about 500 acres, and that's our biggest one right now. Usually it's somewhere between, 100 and maybe 300 or so. But you can still do a lot for grassland birds on that relatively small acreage. We brought the program to the upper Midwest about 3 years ago, and we've really ramped it up in the last couple of years. Now this program is in, now it's in quite a few states, and over 3 million acres, 15 states. That's the stat I was looking for. And we just hired somebody in Iowa to add that to the list. And soon as I'm going to show you, this is actually an older map. There are more in Minnesota now, and there's more in Wisconsin, which I think is this slide. Yeah. So, just in the last couple of months, actually, we've had that third party certify 8 ranches in Wisconsin. We have 8 total. The one in Dodgeville has been there for several years as our pilot ranch. But now we have 7 other ranches in the Driftless and in central Wisconsin. And soon that's going to balloon to probably about 15 to 20 ranches, because we have a pretty big list of people who are interested, who Ashley's worked with, already been to their ranch, talked to them about ways they can improve the habitat for these grassland birds. And they're really interested in and really proud of the fact that they can promote grassland bird habitat on their land. These 8 certified ranches we have so far are about 2,000 acres. So like I said, less acreage, but those are very important pieces to the puzzle for these declining grassland birds in our states. And it's not all about Audubon conservation ranching, as I'll mention later, or as I'll explain in more detail later. Not everyone is going to be a fit for this. We work with some people who don't even graze cows, but have grass, and that's at least another 30 people where we're working with them. We're working with people now on putting their cows on state property that's across the street or in the area, because cows are a very, very good tool for keeping succession back. And encroaching brush and cottonwoods and things like that into grasslands is one of the biggest threats for the longevity of grasslands and grassland birds. And it's expensive to do controlled burns, to mow it all. So if you can get fences out there and put cows on it, even if it's just occasionally, they are really, really effective tools for managing brush and other encroaching vegetation. So now I'm going to get into the species that we are focusing on in this program. And what you'll see, and what I'll really reiterate, is that not all grassland species like the exact same habitat. And that's another thing that makes grazing really, really important. So yeah, there's a scale here where some species like more heavy grazing, so almost graze down to like what a green on a golf course would look like. Some like it in between, Some need really light grazing where they still want pretty tall grass, pretty thick grass. So those areas either need to be grazed by only a couple of animals, or they need to be rested for sometimes even more than a year to let that grass grow back in a thick manner. So yeah, I'm gonna go through these species and kind of show what these habitats look like. And again, grazing is such a good tool because you can do a lot of these different habitats at once. So if you think of it in like a patchwork way, and this is if you've got a couple hundred acres or something like that, where we work with these landowners where parts of their fields will be grazed heavier, parts of their fields will be grazed lighter. So all of these birds have different areas to go. And then if the animals come through, they can still have areas elsewhere in that network of fields that have suitable habitat for them. So these are birds that prefer really, really short grass. Horned larks, probably not a surprise to you because you'll see them out in out in cornfields and soybean fields early in the spring that are basically just bare dirt. So they like pastures that have really short grass. Probably the shortest of any bird that I'll talk about. And again, they like so much bare ground that they'll even use agricultural fields. Problem with that though is a lot of times they'll nest and when there's all that bare ground before farming starts, and then they'll be incubating eggs or have hatched young, and then pesticide gets sprayed or something like that, and then they have to start over again because that nest is going to fail. So if they set up in a situation like this, they're going to be able to be a lot more successful. The grasshopper sparrow, a little bit less common in eastern Wisconsin than western Wisconsin, but definitely some of those at the Jersey Flats, in the Kettle Moraine, and probably another couple areas nearby. They like shorter and thinner grass, pockets of open areas, especially sandy type soils. So they're one that's gonna like moderate grazing, maybe lighter to moderate grazing. They get back usually in mid to late April. They winter down in Central America, and I think some might winter on the Gulf Coast, but mainly a neotropical migrant. This, one of my favorite birds, unfortunately one of the birds that's declining the most in the upper Midwest in grassland birds, but upland sandpipers, which used to basically be a symbol of the countryside decades ago. Now you're really lucky and you have to almost go somewhere like Buena Vista to see or to hear one. They like that shorter grass too. It's really good for them, especially when they have young and their young can follow them around. But they need that to be next to thicker grass for nesting, because, and this is true for a bunch of these species, where in different parts of their life cycle, they need different kinds of grass. So more cover for nesting, and kind of in between for foraging. And then once their chicks hatch, that second half of the summer, they'll go somewhere where they can walk around easier and forage on insects easier. So again, kind of a network of different types of habitat. And that's also very true for probably our most iconic grassland species in Wisconsin, the prairie chicken, which is only in 3 counties in central Wisconsin. Been in the news a lot lately because of that proposed solar development just on the north side of the Buena Vista grasslands there. And this, just like the upland sandpiper, needs that patchwork of habitat again, where they need areas of shorter grass, especially for their lekking, they have this really, really cool ritual. If you've never seen it, when you go home, just put Greater Prairie Chicken lek in YouTube and you'll see videos. They inflate these orange sacks right here. Their ears stick up. They stomp their feet really fast. You have to get up at about 3 a.m., but it is totally, totally worth it if you've never done it to go rent a blind in the Buena Vista grasslands, because they'll do this dancing routine from about me to the front row away, and it's something you'll never forget. Really, really, really fun way to spend an early spring morning. But yeah, getting back to the habitat again, just like I was talking about for upland sandpiper, where they need these different types of grassland, so it makes their needs more complicated, but grazing can fit that bill. And let's see, yeah. This is what kind of moderate grazing looks a little more like. So you'll see there's a little bit taller grass here than in that previous picture. There is a little bit thicker grass, and that's really going to be the bread and butter for birds like our meadowlarks and bobolinks, which I'll get to next. Meadowlarks really love situations like this. You'll see meadowlarks in hayfields a lot. That's because hayfields usually look like this the time of year that meadowlarks get back. Unfortunately, we lose a ton of grassland birds every year to haying because the birds get back, it looks really good to them, but then the fields get hayed in early June, mid-June, when they still have eggs or young on the nest, and since they have to get back to Central or South America, they do not have time to re-nest in almost all circumstances. So really important for them to have areas that they can nest reliably every year. In Wisconsin here, unless you go to Buena Vista grasslands and some spots in southwest Wisconsin where western meadowlarks are pretty common, usually eastern meadowlarks are the much more common species, and western are pretty rare. And there are some habitat differences too, where western like the shorter grass, kind of like the horned larks and grasshopper sparrows that I was talking about before. If you go to Buena Vista, usually those really big pastures that are grazed pretty heavily are where you hear a lot of the western meadowlarks, and then the areas with bigger standing grass are where you hear a lot of the eastern meadowlarks. And that kind of moderate rotational grazing where animals are moved regularly really, really helps, especially eastern meadowlarks. And hayfields, like I said, can be really, really good for them, but and this is always a big sticking point because we get that people need to make money and people need to have a living, and the more cuts of hay you get, the more money you can make. But if hay can be harvested after about mid-July, that really, really helps birds like not only meadowlarks, but bobolinks, a favorite of a lot of people because they look very sharp, like this male here, and they have this really cool kind of hovering flight that they sing while they're flying over a grassland. A lot of people call them like the R2-D2 bird, because that's kind of what the song sounds like. But very, very similar habitat requirements to meadowlarks, where they like that moderate kind of grazing. And it's cool, like I've done a bunch of surveys, as I'll talk about in a few minutes here, and I've noticed that areas that are actively being grazed in a moderate manner like this have much, much more bobolinks than like a prairie or an idle grassland where the grass is a lot thicker and the grass is a lot taller. They really like having some of that disturbance, and it really, really maximizes the habitat for them. This is another one that will use hay fields a lot, but really needs the hay to be harvested after mid-July or they are not going to be successful. I said I'd talk about a couple of raptors. This again, kind of like I was talking about with prairie chickens and upland sandpipers, where a network of habitat is what's really important, and just the bigger the area of open area, the better. And that's true for pretty much all of these birds. But harriers, you'll see them, they're a year-round resident in areas that are very open, can be a mix of grass and agriculture. Having agriculture, if it's row crop, next to grassy areas is a good thing because it's better than like a forest, because grasslands like wide open areas with very far view sheds. So even if a field isn't providing breeding habitat because there's no grass on it, like a soybean field or something like that, if there's a bunch of grasslands nearby, that's better for grassland birds than like a forest would be there, because the land is still open. And where there's harriers during the day, if you're lucky, you can see short-eared owls in those spots at night. I know Kill Snake just north of here is where a lot of people go to see them, but sometimes other areas too. If you're out, a lot of times they don't come out until right before twilight, or during twilight. But again, the larger the grassland, the better. These, as harriers do a really good job on small mammal populations. You can see them in wet areas too, like sedge meadows. They don't really nest in this area. I think the only confirmed nesting in the Breeding Bird Atlas was in Buena Vista, but they do winter in this area. And if you've ever seen one, they're one of the coolest birds you'll see, where they basically look like a big moth flying with that really slow wing beat. Just such a cool bird. Dickcissel, one of a favorite of late summer. They get back probably later than any other bird in the state on average. Usually, I don't even see or hear my first Dickcissel of the year until Memorial Day weekend or even the first week of June, after a lot of our grassland birds have already been back for more than like a month. And just like in this picture, their special niche is that they like forbs a lot. So this one's on a milkweed, but anything like brown-eyed Susans, or even name your favorite forb, and even like Queen Anne's lace, parsnip, even though it's a horrible plant. Dickcissels will use that quite a bit just because the structure's right, but you don't want to be promoting parsnip because that'll take over a grassland and then nothing else is going to use it. But anyway, Dickcissels, they're a bird where there will be different numbers of them, different years. They're a highly eruptive species where some summers there's just a ton of them around. Pretty much anywhere with grass, you'll hear them. And then some summers, they're pretty hard to find, where you have to go to a large grassland to just find a couple of them. And a lot of the research is that that's kind of related to if there's a drought south of us, if it's a really wet season south of us, because these birds will actually sometimes breed once south of us, like in May, like Arkansas, Kansas, kind of that latitude, and then come up here to breed again. But if those areas are in more of a drought type situation, or it's really wet down there, more of them will just pass that area up and come straight up to our latitude. And then we'll have a eruption, which you'll hear that term too with like snowy owls, or evening grosbeaks, Bohemian waxwings, birds like that. And that just means that it's a really good year or a really good period for that species of bird, better than normal. So then I think my last big category, other than a couple other examples, this is lighter grazing, so longer and thicker grass. And again, these are situations where a lot of times you have to basically rest an area for at least a year to let enough grass regenerate. So it's harder to provide because usually someone needs to use all of their areas, but sometimes even just setting aside 20 acres or something like that can still get you some birds like Henslow sparrows. Or I've seen where if there's like a wet swale in a pasture and the animals don't go in that area much because it's wet, or a wet swale in a hay field doesn't get cut because of how wet it is, a lot of times that's where you'll find a Henslow sparrow because the grass is taller, it's thicker. They need a residual layer of vegetation. What that means is you can think of it as like an understory in the grassland where there's fallen over grass from the year before under the current grass that's growing, and they really like that. Sedge wren, a fun bird. They'll sing all day and all night. I really don't even know when they ever sleep. Yeah, it's crazy. Like, I'm one of those people who loves to do the big days in May. And a lot of times that's our first bird of the day at midnight because you get out of the car and and it just goes over and over and over again. And you're like, when does this bird ever sleep? Yeah, they also like that thicker, taller grass. Again, they'll use hay fields too, but usually they arrive even later than those meadowlarks and bobolinks. So and with some of these grassland birds, it's interesting because you can tell birds are showing up that probably got kicked out of other spots because of earlier haying. Like sedge wrens, dick thistles, even Henslow sparrows, the bird I just talked about, they'll show up in a spot where you've been listening all summer in like early July, and it's like, where did this bird come from? This bird was not here for the last month, and it's probably a bird that unfortunately was somewhere that got hayed, and it's looking for a habitat. Maybe one last shot at trying to get a nest off for the year. And yeah, so a couple other unique situations. Grazing wetlands is actually, there's some types of wetlands that are probably better not to disturb, but grazing wetlands can be very good in most situations. And again, it's just like grasslands where if you don't, thick vegetation like cattails, like willows, alders is gonna come in, but cows keep that at bay. If you look at this picture, I mean, you see some exposed mud, a nice mix of native vegetation, and that would probably look a lot different if this would not being grazed. Blue-winged teal and a lot of other waterfowl, their best habitat for nesting is in grass that's within walking or maybe waddling distance for a bird like this from a wetland. They really love that transition from wetland to grass, so they know that their nest isn't going to get flooded out if there's a rainstorm. And yeah, in the Dakotas, that kind of habitat is extremely important for several different waterfowl species. But here, blue-winged teal, mallards, sometimes shovelers will use habitat like that. Another bird that really likes grazed wetlands is Wilson's snipe, a relative of the woodcock. They do that winnowing overhead in the spring, which is a really cool noise. And when you talk about grazing, another thing is it can do a really good job maintaining savanna type habitat too. Again, the whole point of a savanna is you have several large trees, usually oaks. I think this is, yeah, that's not an oak there, but yeah, even a tree, even other species, this type of structure is perfect for especially birds like red-headed woodpeckers, but also orioles, eastern kingbirds, particularly orchard orioles, really like savanna type habitat. So that a lot of our landowners, it's not like they can't have any woods. Even though woods fragments grassland habitat, a lot of times, especially like if they're in the driftless, the sloped areas will be wooded, but if they're grazing those areas, it can provide excellent savanna type habitat for red-headed woodpeckers, which like big trees, but open space between those trees that you would not get in a natural forest that's not being maintained by either grazing or fire. So yeah, those are kind of our iconic focal species of the program. Another big part of Audubon conservation ranching is we track the birds that are using the place before, during, and after any kind of management that we agree on with the landowner in those habitat management plans. So myself and others will monitor at each location, usually about every other year. Point counts, we track something called the Bird Friendliness Index, which I'll get into in a little bit. But you can see in the last 2 years, we've monitored all over Wisconsin. The closest we've gotten to here is a couple farms in Green Lake, Wapaka counties, or Shara County. There's some nice farms that have a lot of bobolinks and eastern meadowlarks and birds like that. But like I said, our main focus is usually going to be the driftless area, central Wisconsin, but a bunch of southeast Wisconsin too. We've monitored 34 ranches in the last 2 years. A bunch of these are going to be future Audubon Conservation certified ranchers. Some of them aren't though, like I said. We do work with other people too on other situations that don't fit ACR, but people who still want their bird populations tracked, and we can provide that for them. And oh yeah, I always like throwing this picture in. This is Ashley's ATV after driving around his farm in Chippewa County. A very telling sign of a healthy grassland with a lot of food for grassland birds, just covered in insect larvae. I guarantee you would not see that on a farm that's being doused in pesticides regularly. Tons and tons of bird food in that picture there. So when we monitor for landowners, we'll generate little reports for them where we tell them what species of birds we had out there. And this is one cool graphic that we'll give people. So this is basically each spot that we monitored from. And there's a little pie chart at each spot showing which of those species we found. So you don't have to be a scientist to just glance at this and say, okay, well, these spots here, maybe that one too, had the most species, where this one only had one, these only had a couple. And then we'll look at the aerial, we'll work with the landowner on why that might be the case. And I would bet you that in this situation, these were really good because that's a rather large field. This looks like a nice little mosaic of habitat with probably, I bet the fences are where these colors change, and there's a nice little heterogeneous patch of habitat there. And And then there's less down here because look at what we see here. These are tree lines. And like I said earlier, that fragments the habitat. So if they were to maybe remove these tree lines, I think this would look a lot more like these, where you would have a lot more birds in a bigger, you would make a much bigger field than having one large field and one small field here. Just one example of a recommendation that we'll give to people, but it can be pretty variable. I'm not gonna get real into the weeds here, so don't worry about seeing all these different stats, but when I say bird friendliness index, it's basically the abundance, so how many meadowlarks, for example, did we find? The diversity, how many different species, not just these grassland species, but other species did we detect on the point counts? And then the vulnerability, so Audubon has vulnerability scores. I showed those graphics earlier about how grassland birds are more vulnerable than a lot of different birds. Each species kind of has like a score, if you want to think about it that way, where a bird like a bobolink would have a much higher score than something like a song sparrow or a red-winged blackbird, because they're everywhere, they're not vulnerable. So there's a calculation like that, we call it the BFI, Bird Friendliness Index, and on our certified ranches, usually that's gonna increase by about 8% or so annually, we found. Some of the ranches that have been in the program for about 10 years now have increased up to 76%. The functional diversity has gone up. Functional diversity is just basically what I was just talking about. When you combine the total number of birds plus the number of kinds of birds there, and again, I hate like saying the word value because every bird is valuable, but in this context, again, a bird that is declining in population or more vulnerable to habitat loss is going to be more valuable in this type of calculation. So basically, these ACR ranches have a higher bird friendliness index on average than this regional average is just like basically the average non-ACR grassland in that area. And the point count data that we collect while we're out surveying goes into this, but also eBird data to get that kind of surrounding type data. I'm not a statistician, so a lot of this calculation is beyond me, but really cool stuff that the Audubon science team is calculating. With the grant that we got last year, we're piloting a really cool thing where we're literally paying landowners for having these species on their land, modeling it off of, I forget the name, but it's a Prairie Institute out west, where they're paying people who have like black-footed ferrets and stuff like that on their grasslands. But basically the model is if someone does a habitat management project to improve their grassland bird habitat, and they have a certain number of those species that I talked about earlier, they get something up toward like between $2,000 and $5,000 or something like that, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it helps, and it might be the difference between cutting your hay on June 15th or waiting until July 15th. So it's going to be a cool test of what kind of value and what kind of dollars and cents is having these species worth to people who money is the most important thing for. I talked before about how we have some grants that fund habitat management directly on the ground. So here's an example. This is up in the prairie chicken country in Portage County, I think. This is the same area. First, this tree row is here, and then after about a day of work, that tree row is completely gone. And basically what we just did there was make this habitat twice as good because it's twice as connected and now a much bigger patch of grassland. Same thing here. This brush present before, like I said, that's something that grazing can really get after. But you can also mow it too or burn it. In this situation, I think it was mowed and then a fence was put in, so they'll be able to put animals in there to maintain this as more open area. This is adjacent to, I think this is Paul Olson Wildlife Area with state-owned grass. So again, expanding that grassland habitat. One more example. Cedar encroachment can be a really big problem for grasslands, especially out west, but that does happen in Wisconsin too. That can be a very aggressive species. This is red cedar, not the white cedar that we have in this part of the state in swamps. But yeah, once that starts growing, it's refuge for raccoons, other predators that they follow these tree lines, these pockets of brush, and they will absolutely pound grassland bird nests. And there's a lot of research out there that the farther a grassland bird nest is from a patch of trees or a fence row or some other avenue of transportation for a predator, the more successful they are. Yeah. I know I showed some doom and gloom slides earlier, but with work like this, with a lot of the work that our partners are doing, with the newfound emphasis in the last few years on grassland birds, we are seeing a lot of interest. Like I said, we've got 60 people or so that we're working with, more than 30 people lined up for this program, who we don't even have enough capacity to sign them all up right now. There's basically a waiting list. So it's great to see this energy and this enthusiasm. And despite the chart that went like that, basically our goal is to make it not go like that, but to kind of level that curve out, maybe even build it back up eventually. And we really do think that that's possible. So yeah, thanks so much for listening. Happy to stay as long as people have questions or comments about this or any of the other Audubon projects that I mentioned in Wisconsin, or you can always feel free, if you think of something later, to shoot me an email as well. But thank you so much.
Thank you.
A question, in terms of, say a farmer or a rancher has a 200-acre farm. Okay, and how many cows are we talking? Because that's gonna have impact on the
Yeah.
land.
Yeah, oh yeah.
So do you have
For
any
sure.
advisements to the farmer about that?
Yeah, I mean, we're never gonna tell someone to like sell cows or something like that, because that's
But you could
that's their
tell them what would
livelihood.
be the ideal number
Exactly.
for that amount of land.
Yeah, and I don't have a background in farming like my colleagues do, so I don't even know what that appropriate number is, but yeah, that's very, very important. I think on average something like, I've been to a lot of pasture walks where Audubon will be invited to a pasture walk where a bunch of grazers from the nearby counties will meet at somebody's land, and they'll talk about what they're doing out there, what's working good, what's not working, and it's kind of like a guided field trip or hike. And usually on like a 200, 300 acre area, I'll see like, 40 to 50 cows, something like that. Again, a lot of these places are smaller, family-owned type business models, not these big CAFOs with feedlots, things like that. And we are working, another question that we get a lot, what about dairy cows? And we are starting to partner, we've partnered with Organic Valley to work with quite a few of their landowners, and starting to really get the word out with them too. The dairy farming is even more variable, where you'll have some of those absolutely huge farms with tons of cows, but there are still some smaller dairy farms out there. In general, they're not doing great because they're just getting out-competed by the larger farms, but there are still some out there in the landscape, people doing really, really cool stuff, similar to some of these, some of the beef farms that we work with. So yeah, sorry I don't have
That's good.
great details,
Yeah.
but yeah, that's kind of a ballpark. Yeah,
Are any of the sheep farmers getting involved?
that's a really good question too. And so far, I should have mentioned this too, bison, especially out west, I think we're about to certify our first bison farm in, it's either Missouri or Minnesota. And we've started to talk to someone who grazes bison in Wisconsin. That's what we've been doing so far is bison and beef, but there is talk of including sheep and even goats. There's a sheep farm that we've been surveying, actually a couple of them. So we have started to survey them just to see what the bird data looks like compared to the beef areas, and yeah, those can provide excellent habitat for bobolinks, meadowlarks, and sometimes even better because they're obviously going to graze a little bit slower than a cow 10 times bigger than them will. So yeah, I've heard from higher up in ACR that they're gonna start including, like cheese products and other things from goats, and I think even possibly like wool from sheep and stuff like that into this seal.
The
Yeah.
impact of sheep and goats on the roots of a plant are different than cows.
That's
So
true.
then sheep, don't they cut it a lot closer, and then goats even rip the roots out?
Yeah, which can, if you're trying to keep an area open,
Yeah.
that can be very, very good. In fact, I know people have even started, I talked earlier about our wetlands up in the Green Bay area that are struggling to exist because of Phragmites. People have even started to experiment with putting goats into those areas because they'll eat almost anything, and they can climb a little bit too. So like if there's a snag or something out in some of these areas, they'll literally like go up on top of it to get up to the top of like a 10-foot stalk of Phragmites. But yeah, definitely there's nuances there of how different animals graze,
Yeah.
how many of each type of animal you need to accomplish what type of habitat you're trying to manage. But yeah, those, again, like I said, it's a win-win because it's food for those animals and they're doing free work if the goal is managing that habitat.
So these ranches, are they then considered organic once they've gotten going, since
Right.
they can then advertise their beef as organic beef?
Yeah, so this is separate than the organic certification. This is its own certification. Now, that being said, there are a lot of parallels between
Yeah, right.
this certification and the organic certification. This one's a little bit more stringent probably because there's a lot of bird specific things in there. So 90+% of the time, if somebody qualifies for this, they could easily get the organic certification if they wanted to, but doing this doesn't automatically make them organic
Right,
certified. Yeah, but yeah, lots of parallels. Yeah.
Do you know if the DNR is doing any kind of work like this on the lands that they manage, the wildlife areas that they manage?
Yeah, very good question. So the answer is some, and we actually are working more and more with DNR, especially up in Buena Vista and Paul Olson where those prairie chickens are. DNR they've been managing that land for a long time. They know what they're doing and they do a good job of it. However, a lot of times they're limited by their budgets, you know. So what we can do to help, like I said, there's some instances where we have a landowner who is within, sometimes it's literally across the street, but sometimes it's a mile or two away from a big DNR owned area. They can bring their cows into that area, help DNR manage that. It's a lot cheaper for DNR. This person now has grass that they can put their animals on, especially during a drought or something like that. Really, the only cost is the upfront cost of putting the fences in that are going to keep the animals there. So, yeah, DNR, they do a lot of controlled burns, some mowing, things like that, but they do what they can, but they are definitely strapped by their annual budgets. But we're hoping that this can help that, and that project I talked about where we're removing tree rows and brush rows and stuff like that, some of that we've actually been doing on DNR land in partnership with them, where we'll match funds that they have, or they'll match funds that we have, or vice versa, to kind of combine funding sources to get that habitat management done. And it varies by location. Like some counties or some wildlife areas have more in their budget to do that type of work than others. It just all depends on the area. Yeah.
Well, sometimes I see some of the DNR lands that are plowed and cropped. Does using this type of approach reduce the need to do that?
Yeah. Again, the question is always going to be, what's the goal of that land? So like those plowed and cropped DNR lands, I guess the question is, are they trying to establish food? Sometimes they're trying to establish like food plots for deer hunting or pheasant hunting or something like that. And this is the first time tonight I've said the word pheasant, because we don't really think of them as like a target grassland species because they're not native. However, pheasant is not a dirty word at all in grassland bird conservation, because they need a lot of the same things that a lot of these species do. So if pheasants and hunting pheasants is what's gonna raise, funds for habitat management, then that's a really good avenue to go. But yeah, getting back to your question, I think it depends on what the goal of that parcel of land is. And yeah, sometimes if DNR is plowing that field every couple of years or something to keep it as grass, yeah, bringing animals in could be a cheaper way to do that. But it'll depend on how close are there a herd of cows or something that could possibly do that, because bringing them from 30 miles away isn't going to be cost efficient either. Yeah.
Well, anybody else who has a question could stay and maybe ask, because he has to get back to bring baby. But anyway, we want to thank you a lot for coming.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah, thank you guys all for coming out. Like I said, if you end up thinking of a question, you can always, I'm sure, get my email if you don't write it down. But yeah, it's always really fun to come to the chapter